Hey you guys, this is Josh
And Carolyn.
with Homesteading Family, and welcome to this week's episode of the Pantry Chat, Food for Thought.
We're not in the pantry. We're standing out in the garden, but it's obviously not garden season yet.
But it is garden planting season, and this is the time to plan your spring garden. So
Today we're going to be talking all about garden planting.
that's right. So come on over and join us in the harvest kitchen. Okay, well, welcome to the harvest kitchen.
Yeah, usually we start off with a little bit of chit chat, but if you want to skip the chit chat and move right down to the main topic, we have everything time-stamped for you. Just hit the See More button and you can move ahead to the main topic of garden planting. But what have you been up to this week?
Garden planting.
You've been doing
Really?
the garden
Yeah,
planting
it's a bit of a process for us. We grow most of our own food.
Yeah.
So it takes some work and some planning. So yeah, still working on that and some behind the scenes homesteading family projects.
Yeah.
Yeah, that membership that we're going to be rolling out this spring. So there's a lot to do in the background.
I am so excited about this. There's so many fun things that are going to happen inside this membership.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm really excited about it.
So not releasing a whole lot of details yet, but a lot of you have been asking, and it is coming.
It is coming.
And about April is what we're shooting for here.
Good.
And, it's just still enjoying the winter lull. It's not long before everything's going to crank up. So enjoying a few good books and taking it easy besides some outside activities with the kids.
Yeah.
Yep. What about you?
I have been busy refreshing some of our cold, remedy stores.
Right,
now.
yeah, okay.
We kind of have a little bit of a cold running through the house. People are getting a little bit of sniffles and a sore throat and everything. So I have been refilling up our stocks. Those have been getting a little bit low. So elderberry syrup and some of those other really good things that we like to keep on hand.
Yeah, you just did a garlic salve.
I just did a garlic salve, and I just did a video on that, so you can watch for that video. Which is really, really helpful. But we like having these things ready and in the house, especially this time of year. So that takes a little bit of management to make sure that your stocks are full.
Well, especially going towards spring, right? Because as soon as that weather starts to change, that's when it really hits you.
Yeah, and we've been having a lot of weather fluctuations here. It's been getting warm, and then it's cold, and then it's damp.
A little early.
Yeah, it really is a little early, but it's that time of year, this time of year. So hey, I have a really good free training on using herbs and understanding healing in your home. And so that's a good one to look for.
Healthy healing at home,
Healthy
right?
healing at home, right? And we'll put that link in the description so that you can find that if you want to jump on and start doing more remedies in your home.
Time of year to be thinking about that as the weather
Absolutely.
starts to change, sometime soon here.
Yeah.
Good, yeah.
So that's been keeping me busy with homeschooling and then ordering seeds. I've been doing the seed ordering.
Right.
And I have a few varieties that I'm having a hard time finding this year. You know, they talk a lot about some of these varieties starting to disappear and get harder to find. And we're seeing that this year, that I'm actually having to go like outside of our normal catalogs to try to find varieties that we have grown and that we love.
Yeah.
And so it's time to get a little more serious about seed saving, I think, so we can keep our varieties that we want.
And then we'll talk about this, but a good reason to be focusing and supporting seed producers that are doing open pollinated and heirloom seeds.
Absolutely.
We'll talk about that more here in just a little bit.
Yeah. Good.
Cool. So shall we get on to the question of the day?
Question of the day.
Okay, this is a composting question. Good question, because we're starting to think about those kind of things. We're actually ongoing composting in the barn right now.
Right.
But Rita Strong asks from the video Plan and Goals, when it comes to using packaging for the compost, does it matter if there is slick or colored ink on the outside of the packaging, or does it need to just be 100% cardboard?
Okay. So we're referring to where we are going to compost packaging, right? And paper
Which
packaging.
can be a great reuse of materials instead of just throwing it away. You don't need to put it in the landfill. It's mostly carbon you're benefiting from, but we all can do good generally to be importing some carbon onto our property and turning it into some good organic material. But there are some things you don't want to do. because some of those things are toxic and don't easily get taken out of your soil.
Right.
And so, Rita, you've really touched on it real well. You do not want any glossy paper. Color or not, you don't want glossy paper. And you don't want any kind of tapes, anything like that, any kind of plastic tapes. However, cardboard is fine. Newspapers are fine. Even colored ink that is non-glossy, which you don't really see a whole lot of that.
Yeah, newspapers.
But, yeah, but newspapers.
Yeah.
And the reason is those in proper composting will all break down. The compounds get broken down and bound up in the different chemistry that happens. And so OMRI does certify you can do compost and use those materials for mulch and compost. It's pretty well understood in organics that you just stay away from glossies, tapes, certainly any plastics, but you can use newspapers and
Cardboard.
inks just as long as they're not glossy.
Okay.
That stuff can be easily broken down with proper composting methods.
You know, what I really like about that is that you can take a lot of the waste that you're already generating that you'd have to throw away and just, get to the dump, and you can turn it into something that's beneficial for your garden.
Right.
I really like that, because right there, we're talking about going further away from producing waste towards that no waste. And, how a percentage of trash, a good percentage of trash is paper trash.
Products, right.
Right?
Yeah, and one of the things we're going to be doing this year is shredding more so that we can use it for bedding maybe in the chicken coop.
Bedding.
Then it can go to the compost, but you can also mulch with the newspapers, with the cardboards, if you're doing any layer gardening, and some of the things you've seen us do in the past, that we'll be doing more videos on this, quick starting gardens by laying down carpet or paper or newspaper. Yeah, we don't do the carpet, but people do. There's a whole lot of other uses, so it doesn't have to be composted to use it. I mean, eventually it's going to be composted,
right? But
it doesn't have to go into your compost. So there's a lot of different ways to use that material.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. All righty, cool. Well, that is our question of the day.
Okay.
And so let's dive into topic, which is spring garden planning ideas and tips. So we want to share with you some of our planning ideas and tips that we use every year to plant a garden, specifically for springtime in this case, since that's the mode that we're going into here.
Okay.
Right?
All right.
And so to get started, let's cover a couple things real quick. We're not going to dive in deep to, but we're assuming you've got your garden location. Right?
Yeah.
We're assuming you've picked your garden out. If you're just getting started, you want to do a little research on garden location, and making sure it's in a good sunny spot, getting enough sun a day. Things like that. So we're assuming you've got that dialed in. For right now, we're assuming that we're not worried about size. You're working with what you have.
Usually you've got that.
That's a whole nother area of planning, broader scope. We're going to narrow it down a little bit more.
Okay.
You do want to make sure you've got your general layout of your garden.
Okay, meaning like your rows versus...
Your rows orientation. You may not be doing just a rectangle garden, and certainly want to encourage you, especially in small spaces, to be looking for niches.
Okay.
If you're in a hot environment, you might need more shade for your brassicas and your lettuces. Or if you're in a cooler environment, you need to maximize the sun and even how you orient things when you plant them. Like, you don't want to plant, you don't want to overly shade some of your hot crops that need the heat, like the tomatoes and cucumbers.
Yes,
you
they
probably don't want to put tall corn on the southern side of them.
Okay.
So, you're thinking a few things like that. You also need to be doing your soil testing.
Yeah, make sure you've already worked out those soil issues, right?
Right, yep, and that's a whole nother discussion.
Yeah.
And of course, if you've been following us for a while, I have a passion for soil and developing good soil. But hopefully you've done your soil testing and any amendments you're going to do. If you didn't do that in the fall, then definitely you want to be doing that in the spring. Good rule of thumb, if you have an established garden, is 1/4 to 1/2 inch of quality compost.
Okay.
At a minimum in your garden.
Every year?
Every year.
Every year.
Yeah,
okay.
if a well-established garden doesn't need a whole lot more than that. But if you really want to get technical, you got to know your organic matter content, and that dives into deeper levels. So just, if you got a new garden, you're improving ground, you can do 1 to 2 inches a year.
For the first year?
For the first year as a general rule of thumb. And as it gets going, 1/4 to 1/2 inch. We're doing a lot more than that right now because we had like 0 organic matter in our soil.
Right,
So we're doing a couple inches a year.
Yeah, so we're going into our second year in this garden space.
Yep.
And so we've done some amendments.
Right. And so other amendments you may want to do, while we don't do regular fertilizers, you can use COF, which is complete organic fertilizer.
Yes.
And that is mineralization of the soil and can be a real help toward boosting your garden, especially in the early years, to boost that nutritional density.
Right.
And we'll be talking about that in the future as well, but you can also just Google complete organic fertilizer.
Right. And, you know, if your vegetables don't have minerals in them, you're not going to get minerals from your vegetables. So this not only helps your garden and your vegetables grow, but it helps you be healthier too. So it's important to get those minerals in.
Well, and a good subject to touch on real quick is that organic is great, but as you've said many times, organic mostly refers to what's left out of the soil.
What's not in
Not putting in the organic materials, pesticides, herbicides, and being careful that we don't put anything inorganic in it.
Right.
There's a case that we need to go further than just organic and just composting.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we do want to consider organic fertilizing, which does get those minerals back into the soil, particularly when we haven't beefed up the biology and all the other components that help bring that out in a natural environment.
Right.
Right.
Good.
So those are things you want to be covering and thinking about as you're planning. But what we're going to dive into here is just really diving into spring planning right now and how we plan our garden out.
Right.
So where's the first place that we usually start?
We usually start with the records that we've kept. Now, some years we've been really good in our record keeping, and some years we haven't been really good.
Yeah, we're getting better.
We're getting better, but I've got to say, every time we've kept records, we've used them, and we have benefited greatly from them. So even if they're just a really quick record, like jotting something down, it's really helpful.
It is, but the more the better, the more detail you can do on when you plant, how the weather's going through the year, what you're observing in the garden, what your harvest is like,
and
when your frosts and freezes are on both sides of the season.
And whether or not you like the vegetables that you grew.
Right.
Because it's really good when you've grown 3 different varieties of carrots and you go, oh, we actually did this year. We forgot to write down which variety it was that we liked so much. And then we had one that we didn't really like. And then we're sitting there going, which one was it that we liked? Which one didn't we like? I can't remember.
Well, especially in a year, this was a first year on this property. So we trialed like 6 varieties of carrots.
We had a bunch of different varieties,
And
because we didn't make the notes at the end, we weren't sure which ones to go with this year. And so make those notes through the year.
It's really, really important. And you know what? It doesn't have to be complicated. We just use a book like this, just a binder, This is great. You can get a fancy leather bound. There are books that give you planners, and there are even computer programs, if you're really techie, to really follow everything.
Right.
And, so do what works for you,
Yeah.
but make sure you're keeping records so that when you're sitting down right here in the spring, you can go back and review all the details about last year.
Good.
Okay.
Good.
Another one is having a garden planner. And by that, I mean like a sliding rule garden planner like Clyde's. You guys have seen me reference this before. And this is just a sliding rule garden planner that has all kinds of great information based on your first frost, or your last frost in the spring, or your first frost in the fall. Very, very important and very helpful. In fact, we're going to talk all about this next week. How to use one of these next week, because this is a great, great tool, especially for the first several years that you're on a property.
Right.
Yeah. Really good.
Yeah. Good. So you've kind of touched on this a little bit, but what's really important is to know your average your last and your first frost dates and your freeze dates. So you want to know when you're going to get your last frost, most likely in the spring, and when your first frost is going to hit you in the fall, because that gives you your growing window in between. Now, it's also helpful to know the freezes so that you can work in the off seasons and you can have your spring gardens and your fall gardens that can handle a little bit of frost but can't maybe go through a hard freeze. So the best way to find these things out, if you are new to gardening, maybe you haven't been doing a lot of gardening, the best way to find these things out is to talk to other gardeners right in your area.
As close to you as possible.
Like your neighbors. If they garden, talk to them. Go knock on the door 2 doors down from the guy that has that vegetable garden.
Absolutely.
And go ask him what his experience has been.
Right.
Because that's your surest way. And areas can have microclimates all over the place, which means that you may have one climate in your area, one expectation of your frost dates at your house, but half a mile or a mile away could be different. That's how it is at where we are. We're up in the mountains
of microclimates
and on a river valley,
Right.
and so we have a lot of microclimates. And some of our nearest neighbors have totally different experience than we do right here on the property. So go as close as you can. Don't necessarily trust whatever the big, broad USDA map is that says, about this time.
Right, and you do have your ag extension, which is a good help, especially if you're getting settled in and you probably want to connect with them anyways, but they're not going to get your site down. So ultimately, that's where those records become really important. So you start recording the trends year after year, and you'll really start to understand what your site is like.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
All righty. Well, now it gets into the fun part and really the heart of things. And I know you just have so much fun with this particularly.
I do.
And that is choosing vegetable seeds, choosing your seeds. What are you going to buy?
What are you going to buy?
What's the best way to go about
well,
that?
There's a lot of hot words out there right now about garden seeds and varieties. Words like open pollinated, heirloom, GMO, hybrid. So let's take a moment and just hash those out and explain those words, because I think there's a lot of confusion in that area. Okay?
Sounds good.
So you want to start?
Yeah, you betcha. So open pollinated is one term that you'll hear, and that is seeds that reproduce true to type. So basically that's kind of a seed in its natural environment. When you grow it and it grows up and it bears seeds, it's going to reproduce, those seeds are going to reproduce a plant true to type.
Okay, so an example of that is that if you take the seeds out of a brandywine tomato, which is an open pollinated tomato, and you plant those the next year, you're going to get baby brandywine tomatoes.
Right.
That sounds really intuitive, right? Except that not all seeds are like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we'll keep moving down a little bit. One thing to say about open pollinated, they still do have the ability to adapt to their environment.
Yes.
Some of your others don't so much.
Right.
So over long periods of time, they can change in an environment, which is really a good thing for you because you can land race your own varieties over time. Another subject. So heirloom is another term you'll hear a lot.
Right.
And heirloom is just the establishment, the long-term establishment of those open pollinated varieties. And technically, I believe it's about 50 years is what they say makes an heirloom. You'll see that term thrown around pretty loosely.
An heirloom seed is just an open pollinated seed with a story or a history. It means it's gone back some years. People have been growing it continuously for some amount of years.
And then you have what most people are used to, which is hybrid seeds.
Hybrid seeds.
And that's where you've taken a couple of open pollinated varieties and crossed them to get a particular trait that you want out of, say, a tomato.
Right.
Like your brandywine.
Right.
Or your early girl's a real popular one.
So maybe you're going to take your brandywine tomato and cross it with a Cherokee purple tomato, and you're going to get something else that kind of has positive traits of both of them in the middle.
Which can be great for a purpose.
That can be great for a purpose. That hybrid is that baby there. So what happens if you take that baby that's a hybrid and you go to save its seed?
You don't know what you're going to get.
You just don't know what you're going to get.
You might not get anything.
Right.
Depends.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you're wanting to save your own seeds, it's really important that you aim for these open pollinated seeds. You have to get those to save your seeds.
Right. We really want to encourage you to stick with open pollinated heirloom seeds. And with hybridization, what's happened is actually a couple corporations in the world have control of most of the seeds. It's like 90%.
They can actually patent the seeds.
Right.
Believe it or not, they can own them and control them and say what you can do with them.
And so if that's all we're growing plants that we don't have the ability to save seed from and reproduce.
Right.
So really, really important. And I know when we got started in this, people thought we were crazy for starting an heirloom, open pollinated garden, told us how bad it was going to do and it just wasn't going to work.
Right.
And it was one of the best gardens we'd ever had, and we've never turned back. So if that's something that scared you, don't. Just dive in. Don't worry about it.
You can still get great yields. You can still get great disease resistance, all of those things with those open pollinated varieties.
Now, here's another tip that's really important to consider.
Okay.
Is talking about scary is GMO, genetically engineered, genetically modified organisms, but in this case, genetically engineered seeds.
Right.
And the confusion between those and hybrids.
Yes, that's
talk about
often confused between a hybrid, and there's actually been a lot of information put out by the genetically modifying companies that say, well, they're just kind of like hybrids, and they are not. What they do when you genetically modify an organism, you actually go in and change its DNA. So it is no longer just a seed. It's usually a seed, a plant that has had the DNA of a different species interjected into it. A lot of times it's a bacteria that they put into there to make it so that it'll kill an insect or a pest, or it will not die to a certain herbicide or different things like that. So this is very different than a hybrid. Hybrids happen naturally out in nature all the time, but a genetically modified organism takes a laboratory in order to do that, and those are definitely controlled.
So just say no to GMO.
Absolutely.
However, hybrids, while we try not to use them,
Right.
there's nothing technically wrong with them,
Right.
other than they're just overused, and so that starts causing a problem with actually having availability of seeds and the people in local areas having control of their food. So they can have a purpose in certain places.
Right.
Okay? All right, well, we better move on from there so we
Okay,
get all
so
this
now you
in.
guys have those terms down. We're going to talk about other ways that you need to choose your seeds.
We do, but let me just share. Can we share a couple companies real quick? Because people like to ask, where do you get your seeds?
Where do you get your seeds? Yeah.
So generally, we try to suggest that you find local producers.
Right.
Or regional producers, but not local like in your town, but in your region. And those are becoming more and more prevalent.
They are. You do have to be careful, though, because sometimes a seed company will be based out of one place, and it doesn't mean they're growing their own seeds in that place. Sometimes they're buying them in from other places. So make sure they're actually growing their own seeds in your region.
So for us, one of ours that we love is Adaptive Seeds in the Northwest here.
Yeah.
And that is a great open pollinated seed company, all organic. Now,
people ask me this one all the time. Where do I get my medicinals, my herbal medicinal seeds? And I generally get them from Strictly Medicinal Seeds. I love this company. It's a really good company.
All right. And for a broad, just kind of foolproof go-to in the open pollinated heirloom world is just going to be your rareseeds.com and the whole seed catalog.
Right.
Love these guys. We did a video a while back there at their place in Missouri. And that's just a good source if you're getting started.
Yeah.
And then you can branch out from there. We usually have to order from anywhere from 2 to 5 companies, depending on what we're looking for in a given year. And from there, you just start looking around.
Absolutely.
Okay, so next.
Other things to consider when you're choosing your varieties is, one, what grows well in your area? I know, for us, we're often in short growing season places. And so we have to be really careful to choose varieties that'll mature in a short growing season. So you really need to think about the specifics that you have in your area. And, this is another one that if you have neighbors that are gardening, it's great to talk to them. What has worked really well for them in your area, and maybe what hasn't worked well for them.
Especially getting started out, and if you're moving from hobby gardening to trying or just getting started and you're really wanting to produce for yourself, you need to work with nature. You need to work with what you've got. Over time, you can build skills and learn how to start to stretch the season and do different strategies. But start with what grows well in your area. Next, another one that's really important.
I always feel kind of dumb saying this, but grow what you want to eat. Like, don't grow a bunch of broccoli if your family doesn't like broccoli, right?
Well, sometimes people get it in their head that if we're going to have a garden, these are the basic things that we grow.
This is what we should grow,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're not going to eat it, don't grow it.
Absolutely.
And so really consider that, not just for yourself, but for everybody in your family.
Yeah.
And so now you start to combine those, what grows well in your area, with what you really want to eat. And that's giving you a good foundation to work from. You can always grow from there and experiment and play and do that. Have some fun.
Yeah.
But start with a solid foundation.
Yep. Okay.
Okay, this is about seed ordering.
Seed ordering,
Yeah.
okay, and how much? Quantity?
Right, quantity of seeds to order. How do you figure out how many seeds to order?
Right, yeah, this is so easy. This is my problem because I love buying seeds. I just need as many seeds as I can get into my seed storage personally. So, but you don't always need that many seeds. You don't need very many.
Well, and if you're buying high quality seeds, like I grew up with a notion, you plant 3, right? How's it go? One for the
blackbird, one for the crow, one for the inchworm, and one to grow.
Right, something like that. And the reality is if you're buying good quality seeds from any of these companies that we're referencing, I've found that I'll do a little tighter spacing, but most things is 1 seed per hole.
Generally, your germination rate is up at like 90% plus, and so you can just plant 1, and it saves you the work of thinning.
Saves you the work of thinning. It saves you a lot of money. And those old sayings come from people harvesting their own seeds and different things happening, and not having the best way to care for them to maintain them through the next season, and so you don't get as well of a germination rate.
Right.
But if we're buying quality seed and we're storing it properly, germination rates, and you do have to understand the germination rates of the seeds, but most of them are pretty high. Some vary. You just don't need to spend, and that's a big bill for us. And we're buying seeds. If we start planting double and triple everything, that's double and triple our bill.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that adds up.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay.
But there's another part to the quantity.
Oh.
Which
is how much you want to eat.
How much you want to eat and spacing.
How much you want to store and how much space you
have.
have.
Right, what you're growing in.
Right.
And so our subjects overlap a little bit, but I guess it's a moment to talk about spacing, because how many seeds you need is going to depend on how you plant your garden.
Right.
So the standard spacing is most of your seed packets have, and your garden books have, recommended spacing.
Seed spacing, right.
That works with the root system of the plant.
Right.
And that's a great place to start.
Yeah.
But there are some other strategies.
There are. You can go a couple of different directions depending on your soil and your water availability.
So if you're in a real dry area and you have water restrictions or water issues, you're probably going to go to a wider spacing.
Right.
And you can actually go very wide and still not have to water a lot in a lot of environments and grow a healthy plant.
Absolutely.
So you have to consider that. Again, that goes into record keeping, talking to your neighbors, and learning your environment and what's best to do there.
We've kind of lost the concept of this in our modern world because we've had so much irrigation commercially that we don't see this, but dry farming used to be very common, and that worked on that principle.
Even in vegetable gardens.
Even in vegetable gardens, right. That worked on that principle that you could space your plants further and further apart where they have more room to grab what they need from the soil, moisture and food, nutrients, and they could grow in that spacing. But the opposite is true too.
Absolutely.
Which is if you have more nutrients and plenty of water, you can actually grow things closer together.
And
than
things
the
do very
spacing.
well in an intensive planting and mixed species.
Right.
And so you can grow very intensely.
Yeah.
And so again, you need to learn what's the best strategy for you.
Yeah.
And then plan accordingly. And so you've got to start to have some sort of spacing plan to know how many seeds to order.
So let's say you think that you have kind of average soil. Maybe it's not super amended. It's not really high quality soil. And you plan on being able to water. Maybe you have an irrigation system set up. Probably your average, the middle plant spacing that they recommend in the seed packets and on the catalogs are probably what you're going to look for. Yeah. If you're growing maybe in a raised bed garden, and you've brought in a lot of really high quality soil for that, and you've got plenty of water, then you might want to go more intensive and get more out of that space.
Absolutely. And a good resource for that, a good tip, is Steve Solomon's book, Gardening When It Counts. He actually talks about 3 or 4 different strategies, depending on your soil and even the types of plants, the low demand versus high demand plants. So that's a good place to start.
Okay, good.
All righty.
Good.
Another one that's particularly important to you on choosing seed is choosing your actual varieties and how to choose one variety of tomato over another, or one variety of cucumber over another.
Yeah, this is really important when you combine what you're going to do with the vegetables once they get into the kitchen. And that is because some varieties of vegetables do really well for storage, or maybe for canning, or maybe for dehydrating, and some are much better for fresh eating. So if you take a tomato, usually in your seed catalog listing, it'll say something like wonderful for fresh eating, great flavor, fresh. Those are going to be the things that maybe you don't need as much of in your garden because you're only going to be consuming them while tomatoes are ripe and producing in the garden. But you might want something else if your plan is to put up a lot of tomatoes in the pantry.
Well, and depending on how you're going to put it up in salsa,
exactly,
or marinara sauce.
Because you want to have a variety that cans well, or a variety that dehydrates well. And there are different varieties for all of those things because people have developed them to do well in those different scenarios. So it's really important to choose your variety based on what you want to do with the end product.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. So another thing, root vegetables. Some are really good storers and store really well in a root cellar type environment or just a cool, damp area. And others really don't, and they're really just for fresh eating. So just make sure you look at your varieties with the end in mind.
Absolutely. The other part of a planting schedule is timing. That's the core part, is figuring out what we're going to plant when.
What we're going to
right?
plant when,
And
exactly.
this is really, really important. This is one of the biggest areas besides your varieties do you want to get right.
Yeah, it is. And because the default method is to kind of go, okay, I know when my last frost date is. So as soon as that last frost date is gone, I'm just going to put everything in the ground all at once, right? And then, but you have some repercussions from that. One of them is you don't get to take advantage of the spring and maybe the fall seasons
Right,
of
it's a
gardening.
season extension and therefore a longer season of fresh eating.
Right. The other is that you're likely to get a whole lot of harvest all at the same time, right at the very end, because you stuck everything in at the same time.
Absolutely.
So you might be overwhelmed on the other side with the harvest.
Right. So this is where, again, your garden planner comes in really handy. That can help you with varieties of vegetables and understanding when your estimated, last frost is,
right?
At least for spring planting, and when you can start seeds indoors and when you can plant them outdoors. And even you have room to start to move things around. You don't just have to do what the calendar says as far as weather goes and frost go. And talking about where you're saying getting a harvest all at once, we've started to learn that we want to move things around so that not only are we planting at the right time, but we're staggering our harvest to take better advantage of that, while creating fresh eating all through the season.
Absolutely.
And that just takes sitting down, understanding your varieties, how long they are from seed germination to harvest. And you were talking to me today about how different seed companies represent that differently.
Yeah, well, it's important to realize when you pick up a seed catalog and they have these numbers next to their seeds. I'm looking at one and it just says 60 to 80 days. That's a pretty big window. Some of them will dial in a lot closer than that. You've got to know, is that 60 to 80 days from planting the seed into the ground, or is that 60 to 80 days from harvest or from transplanting them? Which means they're assuming that you're starting your seeds indoors weeks earlier.
Right.
So it really differs per plant. So you really have to read, usually at the beginning of a section, say, here's the beginning of the section on leeks. Usually they'll tell you what they mean by those numbers. Usually they'll say start indoors, and then you'll know that those numbers are from transplanting outside.
Right.
But your garden planners also give you that information.
They do. They're also sometimes a little geographical, so they are, while they're really good, they are a general rule of thumb, and hence why you want to combine that knowledge with your seed knowledge along with your own records in your environment, because it's really your specific environment is where you're going to really get that down and understand what works for you. Like, I know that we need to do longer indoor planting. We need to start seeds on the varieties that we're going to start indoors. We need a longer window than most of what's on this planter, just because of our shorter growing season.
Yeah, we need them bigger and ready to go
Right,
further
right.
once
We
they
want
hit
them
the
a little
ground,
more
right?
mature. So with that timing, you've really got to combine that knowledge of your frost, your last frost, your variety, its days to maturity, and then think about your harvest schedule and what you're trying to achieve. And we were talking recently about carrots as a real good example. We were doing large trials of carrots to see what was going to work for us here, and we were growing some storage carrots. We started everything very early in the year, as early as we could get carrots going, and we were excited to get carrots going. Problem is those, they're not made to stay in the ground that long.
All the way until storage. Yeah, a lot of your storage varieties need to stay in right up until the first frost. Yeah.
So an example in that, we want to be doing some carrots for fresh eating where we maybe start early in the season. So as soon as they mature, those will, those can last a while. And then we have this variety that we plant later that is made to stay in the ground until we're ready to bring it in and get it into the cellar. And those are two different plantings just for carrots.
Yeah, and that helps you to stage out that harvest so you're not getting overwhelmed, for one, but it also helps you to get the best quality of things that are coming in for your winter storage, whatever that looks like, whether that's root cellared or even your dehydrated or canned things.
So so know the end use and lay out not just where you're planting, but look at where that harvest falls, so that you can think about moving things around on your calendar and look where you can adjust within your growing season, of course, to make better use of season extension, of fresh eating as long as possible, and then of a harvest schedule that is hopefully manageable. It's always fairly overwhelming
Yeah.
when we get into the
There's
harvest.
always something.
But trying to spread that out so you don't end up having things going to waste if
Right.
possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we're getting kind of tight on time. So we have a few other quick mentions for things to...
A few other things for planting
For
right here
planting
in the
purposes.
season. And one is make sure you know your watering system,
Right.
whatever you're doing, and have that system up and ready. Think about whatever you need to get or whatever maintenance you need to do before it gets
you put anything in
hot.
the ground. Well, before you put anything in the ground, really, is
Well,
ideal.
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's ideal. But before you get there to need it, I know for us, we
Absolutely.
can have things in the ground for sometimes up to 8 weeks before we need to start watering because we have a lot of more moisture up here. Don't put it off until you need water.
Right.
You know, get that system dialed in.
Yeah,
Okay?
absolutely. Another thing is to make sure you check your tools right now. Make sure they're sharp. Make sure they're not broken. Make sure they've had all the maintenance done on them that they need so that they are ready to go first thing in the spring.
Yeah, it's no fun to have to deal with, you know, dull tools.
Right.
Or one that I found a lot in the past is tools that have gotten the handles that are wood. I love older tools. I love wood handled tools.
Yeah.
But sometimes that wood, if we haven't taken good care of it, starts to splinter.
Yes.
It's no fun to be getting splinters on from your favorite tool. I have a rake like that I've got to tune up this spring.
Clean up the handle.
Right, exactly. So that's really, really key. And one more is have a weeding plan.
Have a weeding
We
plan.
could probably do a whole video on this.
I think we
but
could.
think ahead how you're going to handle your weeds. And one really important tip, the smaller they are, the easier they are to deal with.
Yeah, the faster they are to deal with too.
Right. Yeah, but plan that into your thinking.
Right. Exactly.
And that's about it, guys. That's our spring garden planting ideas and tips that should really help you get going. And we'll cover more on gardening topics here coming up as we move into
I think
spring.
next week we're talking about actually how to use, we're going to get a lot more specific on how to use a garden planner like the Clyde's garden planner, but any slide planner like that can help to get that,
Absolutely.
get your gardens dialed in.
Just a great, great tool. So hope you all have a good week.
And we'll talk to you next week.
Bye.
Goodbye.